I know the Cleveland Browns, the way their wide receiver room is currently constructed, probably an issue. So, us here at the OBR, one of the fantastic writers put out a great piece discussing wide receiver options that could be available sometime the beginning of summer, middle of summer, or even late summer for the Cleveland Browns to try and acquire. We'll give some thoughts on that. Browns 3D on the OBR begins now. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. I am your host, Jeff Lloyd. We appreciate everybody who comes out every day, reads all the written content from our fantastic group of writers here at the OBR, and everyone who joins us nightly on the OBR streaming network beginning at 6 p.m. Eastern with Browns 3D. Today is Tuesday. Following us, you will have Brad Ward and Pete Smith. Of course, for the React. Following them, Garage Beers, Mike Keefe in the house. There is not a more electric voice at the OBR streaming network than Mr. Mike Keefe. As always, make sure you're subscribed to the OBR on YouTube and, of course, to the OBR over on Twitch. Now, we've had these discussions, and we even mentioned it on yesterday's episode about the Browns wide receiver room, the way it currently is. Look, all the faith in the world. Jerry Jeudy came over last year, really responded in his first year with the Cleveland Browns, really showed everybody whatever the myth or whatever the thoughts were for him, of him. First time with the Denver Broncos, he got out, got here. It was a little choppy at first. Obviously, the Browns, the way their passing game worked last year, certainly was not equipped to have two wide receiver ones. Had a hard enough time handling one wide receiver one. The Browns eventually moved on from Amari Cooper, and Jerry Jeudy just gelled. And the thing I think that was most impressive, and just was it was in 2023 for Amari Cooper, just as impressive for Jerry Jeudy in 2024, is seeing the amount of production these guys were able to put up when they were playing with four, if not five, different quarterbacks. A wide receiver quarterback relationship is a very difficult thing to get to work on a good level. And certainly it's all about chemistry. It's all about repetitiveness. It's all about, every route running it the same, building this relationship, this rapport with each other. And it's certainly hard to do that when your quarterback position is a revolving door. Cedric Tillman, there was a 3-week stretch last year where Cedric Tillman was on a pace of 7 receptions for 95 yards and a touchdown over a 3-game stretch. As we all know, the Thursday night game in the snow against Pittsburgh Steelers, Cedric Tillman gets hit up high, suffers a head injury, missed a lot of time, missed the remainder of the regular season. And I believe this was week 9 when this injury happened. So certainly cause for concern with a head injury of that magnitude, which probably dampened all the good work that Cedric Tillman had put in up until that point. And then you factor in that Cedric Tillman has missed a decent amount of time. His final year, 2022 at Tennessee, his rookie year in 2023, and of course last year, 2024. So you certainly have the right to be positive about Cedric Tillman, and I think what we saw last year, but there's certainly a level of concern to have that Cedric Tillman has had injury issues over the past 3 seasons. Deontay Johnson has been brought in, and it's just been a little bit. Deontay was not part of the OTAs. He was part of minicamp. The tape, the on-field work, the production speaks for itself. But as we know, Deontay Johnson, over the last season and a half, has certainly had his issues finding his comfortability level within whatever organization he was with, whether it was Pittsburgh, whether it was Carolina, whether it was Baltimore, whether it was Houston, whether it was Baltimore again. So Deontay Johnson kind of comes in here. I don't want to say it's maybe necessarily last chance saloon, but he did tell us himself that the Cleveland Browns were one of the few teams, if any, that were actually in serious contact about bringing Deontay Johnson in and giving him an opportunity. Jamari Thrash has had a really good spring to this point, and it was probably not easy for a rookie 5th-round pick last year to, find his way, navigate his way with all the movement at the quarterback position. Browns probably should have played Jamari Thrash more, probably should have played him more and earlier. They didn't. So a season that could have been an opportunity for development for a guy like Jamari Thrash essentially was not. David Bell has not returned from injury. yet suffered the significant hip injury early on in the season last year. Was playing well early, kind of looked like he maybe was going to be production-wise the number 2 wide receiver on this team. We'll see how it goes for David Bell. Then you have Michael Woods. You have the younger undrafted free agents. So you can see that this Cleveland Browns wide receiver room certainly is up for, more competition. Certainly there are guys on other teams that could come in and be a guy who is going to be a mainstay on this Cleveland Browns roster right off the bat. We mentioned some of these teams yesterday. We've mentioned some of these teams in the past. And the article I'm referring to that was on the OBR today was from Brad Ward. So if you haven't read it yet, go ahead and check it out. Brad put together a really solid piece here about some guys that obviously could be legitimate options for the Cleveland Browns at the wide receiver position if these guys don't develop like they hope. But either way, I think there's a real chance the Cleveland Browns, and we've known they have an affinity for acquiring wide receivers. It was hard to find one that was going to be available this past offseason. But now that teams have now added to their rooms, and their rooms may have more capable wide receivers than they're able to technically roster, there's a chance for the Cleveland Browns, either through waiver wires, where they hold the number 2 selection currently, or through a possible trade scenario. The Green Bay Packers, right off the bat, are a team certainly to be considered. They drafted Matthew Golden in round 1. They also drafted Savion Williams. Reed out there has been a really good player for them. There are a couple of names you look at right off the bat from the Green Bay standpoint. One would be Romeo Doubs. The other would be Christian Watson. The thing with Romeo Doubs, now, if we remember, Romeo Doubs was a guy that was essentially out of the mix early last year with the Green Bay Packers. He kind of let it be known, and I think the thing for Romeo Doubs was he had a positive playoff run during the 2023 playoffs. So I think that he was not playing early in the 2024 season. Certainly was a situation for Doubs where maybe he had felt he had proven and had shown that he was deserving of the opportunity. Unfortunately, it wasn't there. As the season progressed, the Packers found a way to get Doubs into the lineup, and Christian Watson's injury eventually, led for a more steady playing time for Romeo Doubs. But now, if things were tight in 2024 with the addition in Green Bay of Matthew Golden and Savion Williams, obviously they're going to be in the same situation in Green Bay again this summer, where they have probably more wide receivers capable of making the roster, but they technically do not have the roster spots. Doubs is an interesting case, I think. Um, Good route runner. He's not a athlete who's just going to absolutely wow you. And again, in 2023, when it mattered, playoff time, Romeo Doubs was performing well and getting it done. So Cleveland certainly could have an opportunity here with Green Bay. And I'm not saying, I know a lot of people want to just say, oh, we'll trade Greg Newsome. Greg Newsome is on the final year of his rookie contract. So I don't know necessarily what the appeal is for a team acquiring Greg Newsome unless they have an absolute need for a guy that can play the nickel and a guy that can play outside. I'm not sure what a 1-year flyer of Greg Newsome is going to do for a lot of these teams. Certainly, I'm not saying it can't happen, but I'm thinking the Browns' best bet to acquire a wide receiver is going to be through giving up a draft choice so a player can get someone under their team control for 4 seasons. Doubs certainly fits the bill. Christian Watson, always been a Christian Watson fan. I think the thing with Christian Watson that I truly like, and anybody who's listened to me and heard me talk Browns football for a long time, is I like verticality. I like the guys who can produce on the longer routes. I don't need everybody to be able to run the underneath, the short route part of the route tree. I do, however, want the guys that can produce the money downs, the money receptions, the 25, the 30, the 35-yard gains that all of a sudden flip a field and can change the momentum of any offensive drive in a snap of the fingers. So that's certainly where Christian Watson has his appeal. And Watson has probably not hit exactly where some people thought he was going to. And it was always difficult for a guy like Watson and that entire North Dakota State team that was quarterbacked by Trey Lance. They barely played their final year. So for a lot of those guys that were coming out of that program, they just didn't have a lot of tape. And it's difficult to go through your draft cycle when there's not a lot of current tape on you. Nobody wants to watch a year and a half old tape on a guy who's going through the draft process. So Watson may not be complete, where I think Dobbs probably gives you a more all around game. But there are parts of Christian Watson's game that I think would translate if the Cleveland Browns would have interest. Certainly, we mentioned them yesterday as well. And New England with the Patriots, they're going to start to get a little, I think a little more defining here. Just exactly who's going to stay in that room and who's not going to stay in that room. And when you have a player like Drake May, an ascending talent at the quarterback position, if you're New England, you want to figure out who his guys are and you want to figure out who his guys are quickly. Certainly, they signed Stephon Diggs. They signed Mac Hollins. Stephon Diggs is obviously his wide receiver one as of right now. That's obviously the way the tea leaves are going to work. But then it comes down to who would be possibly available. There's other guys in that room: Kayshon Boutte, Kendrick Bourne, Javon Baker, Demario Douglas. There's a bunch of players that could be available for the Cleveland Browns to look into. I think if you're looking to coach a wide receiver for the New England Patriots, it's probably going to come down to three names that could possibly be available from that team. It would certainly be Javon Baker, who I mentioned, who was kind of a draft darling 2 years ago, Kayshon Boutte, and second-year wide receiver Jalen Polk, who was formerly from the University of Washington. I was a huge fan of the Washington wide receiver triplets that were in the 2024 draft class. Of course, Rome Odunze, of course, McMillan down in Tampa Bay, and of course, Jalen Polk, who ended up going in the second round to the New England Patriots. It was a lost year for Polk. And I think a lot of people thought it was going to kind of go better. You drafted Drake May, you came back in the second round, you drafted a wide receiver, kind of thinking that, hey, we got our guy, his guy, and maybe things would go from there. But the relationship between Drake May and Jalen Polk just never really matriculated into anything much whatsoever. Polk did find a little bit of success later on in the season. And for all these guys, whether it is Polk, whether it is Butte, whether it is Baker, they're all in a little bit of a difficult situation here. New head coach comes in. Normally, new head coach wants his guys. Well, he brought in two veterans. They drafted another wide receiver in Kyle Williams, who was an absolute steal coming out of Washington State. It's going to force one of these guys, if not two of these guys, out of that room. So Polk would probably be my first choice. I think he kind of runs a little bit of everything. His vertical routes, not his calling card, so to speak. A guy who seemed to excel really good at University of Washington on the slant patterns, on the post patterns, good over the middle between the hashes. All of that stuff is places where he excelled playing with Michael Penix at University of Washington. Kayshon Boutte was a guy that I absolutely loved coming out of LSU. And it seemed like a lot of people thought Kayshon Boutte was going to be a very productive NFL wide receiver. Then all of a sudden, combine came, pro days came, testing numbers came out, and Kayshon Boutte just didn't test well. And looking at the tape, I don't think anybody, when they were watching the tape of Kayshon Boutte coming out of LSU, said, okay, well, here we go. This is a guy that runs 4.3, or this is a guy with a 40-plus inch vertical. He just really impressed with his route running. He knew how to sell a route. He knew how to get in and out of his breaks. It wasn't athleticism that was winning for Kayshon Boutte. It was his ability and understanding of how to play and the nuances of running routes and beating defenders that made Kayshon Boutte successful at LSU. Still a fan, would not be upset with either one of these guys. Javon Baker was really interesting coming out 2 years ago. Coming out, I believe it was UCF, and he had some really remarkable high pointing and just circus type of catches to him. If the ball was in the air, a guy like Javon Baker was going to come down with it. Now, ideally, you don't want to make your hay making the miraculous catches. But a guy like Javon Baker, who showed an affinity in college to have the ability to turn incompletions into completions, seems to me like a guy that might pair pretty well with a team like the Cleveland Browns, who could end up playing rookie quarterbacks 13, 14, 15 games in the 2025 NFL season. So New England certainly has three potential wide receiver trade targets that the Cleveland Browns should and will have high interest in. Curtis Samuel, Buffalo Bills, certainly former Ohio State Buckeye. This guy who's probably going to end up and is probably going to have a lot to do with Elijah Moore going to Buffalo and maybe pushing Curtis Samuel out. It's not that I have an overall problem with Curtis Samuel. It's just I think when we say the Cleveland Browns wide receiver room is lacking, then I need a true wide receiver. Curtis Samuel has always kind of been this hybrid player. I don't have to tell this to you people in Ohio who watched him his whole career at Ohio State. He's kind of a guy that can do a little bit of everything on the offensive side of the ball. And it's not that I don't have a problem necessarily with players like that. While Curtis Samuel is a fun overall player, I just don't think he would fit under the category of the Browns need wide receiver help. Samuel is more of an offensive hybrid. He is not necessarily the wide receiver answer that I think the Cleveland Browns wide receiver room needs. Christian Kirk is down in Houston. Houston drafted two more wide receivers. Their room is kind of set over there. Christian Kirk is 28 years old. He has certainly shown plenty of ability his time in the NFL, starting his career with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He could fit. And we know, and this is one of the reasons I'll bring it up, is we know that the Cleveland Browns and the Houston Texans have similar ideals, similar philosophies, and have shown the ability to work together franchise to franchise in the past. So Christian Kirk certainly could be somebody that is on the Cleveland Browns radar this summer. KJ Osborne, originally with the Minnesota Vikings, and had a nice 3-year run in Minnesota where he put up it was somewhere between 1,800 and 1,900 yards receiving, and then ended up in Washington. Now, Washington, with the addition of Debo Samuel, and well, I don't know if it's an addition, maybe it's an addition because Debo Samuel looks even heavier now than he did last year playing for San Francisco. So maybe the addition of Debo Samuel was the actual addition of his weight. But a guy like KJ Osborne certainly could be had and has shown the ability when given regular playing time that could be a target for the Cleveland Browns. The Chargers, and I was going to say San Diego. I can't believe I almost made that mistake because it's been a while. The Los Angeles Chargers. And this one may be a little bit far-fetched, but Quentin Johnson certainly came on more in year two, developed more consistency in his catching in year two. But the Chargers are deep. The Chargers have added another wide receiver this year to go after, to go with Lad McConkey, who had a phenomenal rookie year. Nobody should be surprised. Lad McConkey was an absolute darling that year. Quentin Johnson probably wouldn't be the, hey, let me slip you a low pick here and hopefully I get a high reward here. After stepping up in year two, I think Quentin Johnson is probably going to, cost you a decent draft pick, probably a day two selection, if that is he even is on the table from the Chargers standpoint. But there's certainly an ability, a possibility that a guy like Quentin Johnson may not be in the long-term plans for the Chargers, hence him becoming available to anybody to possibly trade for. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, you want to talk about a franchise committing to the quarterback by getting him talented pass catchers. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin had many suitors in free agency. Everybody was lining up to get an opportunity to talk to Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin left money on the table, stayed home in Tampa. They draft Emeka Egbuka, and I just Egbuka. I always butchered that name the entire draft process. Drafted Emeka Egbuka. They had Jalen McMillan from last year, who was phenomenal as a rookie and really stepped up when Chris Godwin went down. Sterling Shepard is there, older veteran receiver, played with Baker Mayfield in college. Baker Mayfield was the one that talked him back in to the NFL last offseason. You also have Trey Palmer, could be an interesting name if you are Cleveland to maybe look into. Palmer's got good speed. He's a good vertical route runner. Again, something I think the Cleveland Browns could get some use out of. Also, they drafted Tez Johnson. We all know about Tez Johnson. We talked about Tez Johnson a million times over the draft process. A little bit undersized. Obviously, he was somebody the Cleveland Browns liked. They brought him in for an official 30 visit. Right now, Tez Johnson is maybe wide receiver 6 or wide receiver 7 on that roster. They probably most likely want to keep him, but not a lot of teams keep 7 wide receivers. And most of these guys, outside of maybe Palmer, I don't know you're going to ask any of these guys to play special teams. So certainly could be an opportunity for the Cleveland Browns and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to maybe fuel some conversations to get a wide receiver out of Tampa and get him north up into Cleveland. I think it needs to be done. I think it's vital to get it done. The Cleveland Browns, as much as we, talk about this quarterback competition, and, do you go the veteran route with Kenny or Joe? Do you go the young guy route with Shador or Dylan? A lot of this stuff and a lot of the mistakes that happen with NFL teams and quarterback evaluation is that you basically did not put your quarterback in the best position to succeed. And look, it's not easy to have an offensive line that can protect their quarterback, to have a running game that can help the quarterback and the overall offense by keeping the defense on its toes. Not every team has a deep wide receiver room. Cleveland Browns as an example. So you can't necessarily punish teams for not having everything in place for their quarterback to succeed. But I think having the guys to actually throw the ball to is probably the most important part of it. So if you want Shador to develop, you want Dylan to develop, do you want either one of these guys to possibly make you think that you have a option here of a foreseeable quarterback of the future? Getting another wide receiver in here is vital. Look, Jerry Jeudy has looked phenomenal this spring, and the confidence level off the charts after he proved again to himself and the rest of the league in 2024 just who the heck he is. But the problem is going to be, and if you look at this as you're playing against the Cleveland Browns, what are you taking away right now? If I am devising a game plan to beat the Cleveland Browns, the biggest issue, the biggest thing I need to take away is their best weapon. Their best weapon right now is Jerry Jeudy. So Jerry Jeudy is not going to beat me. So that means in order for whatever quarterback, whether it's the veteran Joe or Kenny, or whether it's one of the kids, Shador or Dylan, you need to have more options. We know Njoku is an option. We think Fannin is going to have a nice small role here as a rookie. Cedric Tillman showing us the Cedric Tillman that we saw last year for that 3-game stretch would be fantastic. Deontay Johnson being Deontay Johnson would be fantastic. But those are ifs. There's one constant in the Browns wide receiver room right now, and that's Jerry Jeudy. And for the Browns to get the best out of whatever quarterback they put behind center, you're going to need more. It's just that plain and simple. You are going to need more. And obviously, we just gave you a bunch of names that could probably scratch that itch for the Cleveland Browns and whoever the quarterback is for this team in 2025. I see everybody's kind of planting their flag as far as the quarterbacks. And I think it's kind of funny that we have basically everybody gets two flags, right? One for your veteran quarterback. Are you picking Joe? Or are you picking Kenny? The other for the rookie quarterback. Are you Team Gabriel? Are you Team Shador? And we rush to try to put ourselves in these positions, right? It's always a thirst for first. It's never necessarily about, waiting it out and, seeing which one ultimately won the marathon as opposed to the sprint. It's everywhere. It's big media, it's local media. Certainly, there's a local media that does not want to give Shador Sanders the time of day, which is absolutely crazy to me. Um, I went back and I watched, and I wanted to purposely do this. Now, if everybody remembers in 2023, when Shador was at Colorado, it was the Colorado State game where Travis Hunter suffered, I don't know if it was lacerated or bruised. He had the kidney issue. If you remember, the kid from Colorado State hit him, took a lot of public heat for it. Deion Sanders actually did the ultimate thing and went to bat for the kid who made the hit and said, leave the kid alone. He's playing the game. He's playing the game the way he was coached to do it. It sucks that our guy got hurt, but leave the kid alone. Nothing malicious was done. Late in that game, Colorado against Colorado State, Sanders, without his top weapon in Hunter, had the ball to 2-yard line. Needed a touchdown and a 2-point conversion to get the lead. You go watch that. I know it's on TikTok. There's other places where that entire drive is cut up. And you go watch Shador Sanders quarterback that drive for the Colorado Buffaloes. And this wasn't 2024. This was 2023. And Shador was making throws. And going back and looking at, and it came across one of my timelines last night. And the reason I stay there, I probably watched the entire video probably a dozen times, whatever, is you saw everything you needed to see in Shador Sanders. There were balls outside of the hash, tight, low, spiral on the money. There was another one where he led his receiver, got him down all the way into the end zone. The 2-point conversion they needed was perfectly done by Shador. It was kind of basically a fake, and the linebackers bit. Shador threw the high, skinny post to the wide open tight end, came down with the 2-point conversion. Buffaloes win. But that was a game that Shador won with guys that most people have never heard of. Jimmy Horn did get drafted. He was one of those guys for that wide receiver room that day. But Shador went in there with the game on the line and went 98 yards. And every ball was crisp. It was accurate. It was thrown with velocity. So the people that I don't get it, because even still, like, if you're not a Deion Sanders guy, I get it. I am one, and I still had my issues with Shador. But you can't just look at Shador and tell me there's nothing there. I'm sorry, it's a crock. It's an absolute crock. And maybe it's because some of us said, hey, he's good. He's not number 2 overall pick good, but there's certainly something there. And I think there's those that just assume if the quarterback was not taken in the round 1 or even the top 10, I guess, that there's nothing there. Shador Sanders was never a 5th-round pick. Shador Sanders was never the 144th overall player in the 2025 class. A lot of BS went on. A lot of people were stubborn. A lot of people just were not going to get off of narrative thinking. And that is why Shador Sanders ended up getting drafted where he was drafted. But if we are going to try to pretend and poo-poo the player that Shador Sanders is, you are doing poor, disingenuous work. The kid can play the position. Does he succeed in Cleveland? None of us know. And you want to know what? There's been plenty of guys that came in here with all the talent in the world to play quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, and it didn't work out. Let's just hope it's not a Cleveland problem. Maybe it's better that it goes this route, where a guy who had a ton of talent, should have went a lot higher than he did, comes in here as the underdog story. And that might just be the case for Shedeur Sanders. So let's leave Shedeur alone. Let's watch the way it plays out, because the Browns may have gotten an absolute steal that 31 other teams refused to draft Shedeur Sanders. I am Jeff Lloyd. I appreciate you all for tuning in every day to Browns 3D. Appreciate you all for tuning in to the OBR streaming network beginning every night at 6 p.m. Eastern. All of you who come out every day, read the fantastic written content on the OBR. Make sure you check out the article by Brad Ward that we discussed about the wide receiver trade targets here for the Cleveland Browns. Make sure you're subscribed to the OBR on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed to the OBR on Twitch. 7 o'clock, Brad Ward, Pete Smith, The React. 9 o'clock, Garage Beers with Mike Keefe. Make sure you all check it out. This has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. Browns 3D on the OBR, and we'll talk to y'all tomorrow.